the libraries and all the digital resources that these universities have, I was able to get market data on white spirits and gin more specifically. And just with my educational background, my corporate background, just kind of like spotting brand trends and training, I had noticed that gin was poised and ready for a renaissance.
Today on Queen Me, I am joined by a founder who is helping redefine what premium looks like in the modern beverage space, bringing transparency, intention, and cultural relevance into an industry that hasn't always prioritized any of the three. Meredith Mills-Merritt is the founder and CEO of the original Southside. It's a ready-to-drink cocktail brand inspired by a family recipe and built with the rigor of her background in beauty. And I have to say, I had tried this and I absolutely love it. It is really incredible, especially, for somebody who maybe is just used to drinking the wines or a White Claw. It's something that, you'll enjoy and the taste is really wonderful. But before we dive in, I want to share a couple of more things. I mean, since launching in 2024, Southside has expanded into more than 20 markets, landed at national retailers like Whole Foods and Total Wine, and it's really built incredible partnerships that, are living as comfortably at cultural events as they do in store shelves. Now, beyond the brand, Meredith is also the founder of Clean Alcohol Collective, which we'll dive into, and that focuses on elevating transparency and manufacturing standards across the category. Today, we're going to dive into a couple of different things. Really, what it takes to build a modern CPG company, the decisions consumers don't see, the leadership shifts founders face, and really how to grow without losing your point of view. So I'm very excited for this conversation. Meredith, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm very excited to chat with you. And again, it's when I had gotten the package in the mail, it's really wonderful. Like it is a cocktail brand that like tastes so good. It's refreshing and it hits all of these categories. So I'm excited to hear how you got into it and all of these great topics. So let's sort of start from the beginning for listeners who may be new to you. Can you maybe talk about your background and a little bit about the path that led you into the alcohol industry?
Absolutely. So, first and foremost, I never thought that I would be in the booze business, and my path was nonlinear. And so, I actually thought when I was getting my MBA, I was going to do either investment banking or management consulting. And so, my educational background is largely in the finance and strategy space. But as I was working through that program, I discovered the wonderful world of brand management. And my professor, who sits on my advisory board, was really the one who helped me kind of get my foot in the door there. And so I got my first job. It was in the beauty world out in Los Angeles, and I fell in love with it. I was doing brand management, product innovation. I was touching on so many cross-functional areas. And in my head, I had always felt like I'd had this entrepreneurial itch. And so with that, COVID hits, and I was on a team that was exclusively focused on teenage acne products, which very necessary, but not necessarily the sexiest thing in the world. And so to feed my brain, I was really diving into other things that I could do with my time. And with this being a family recipe, I'm going to speak for myself. I drank a little bit more during COVID than, I normally do, and really kind of use that as an opportunity to ask myself the question, why does nothing like this exist on the shelf? Like I had a really good recipe that I believed in. And so that's what really started the process and kicked things off.
I think everyone probably drank a little bit more than we like to say during COVID. And
Right.
and it was also the time I think of like testing new things out, new drinks, things that you might not normally have. I mean, because you were stuck inside. So I completely get that. Um, I'm curious though, when you first started, you said you had this like entrepreneurial mindset and drive. There's so many things and ideas that people can come up with any day. What drew you though, do you think specifically to a ready to drink cocktail as the space that you wanted to say, you know what, I'm going to dive into this?
There was a really cool opportunity that I was given to go back to school at the University of Southern California to focus more specifically into consumer behavior, which I was super interested in. And in that program, one of the projects was to create a ready to drink beverage. For that project specifically, it had to be wine based, but still through the libraries and all the digital resources that these universities have, I was able to get market data on white spirits and gin more specifically. And just with my educational background, my corporate background, just kind of like spotting brand trends and training, I had noticed that gin was poised and ready for a renaissance in the US. And this was like 2021, 2022. So in the back of my head, I was like, okay, wait, I have this fabulous family recipe that just happens to be gin based. I haven't seen a single thing like this. With my background being in beauty, the category was already so saturated that I personally felt that there wasn't something that I could introduce to that world that would be impactful. But for alcohol, what I hadn't seen was anybody take that beauty blueprint of ingredient transparency, education, and craft and put it into a can and kind of have that lifestyle effect with it. So when I could put all this stuff on paper and when I got the R&D process started, it just started to make more and more sense. And I think there's something to be said for having a hunch. And so as we started to dive deeper into these conversations, my hunch got greater and greater and greater. And so it's been really rewarding to see that pay off on this side because what we hypothesized ended up coming true. So,
Mm. Oh, that's perfect. Yeah, we'll talk a lot about the hunches, right? And trusting your gut and what that means when you are in business, especially being an entrepreneur, having to trust yourself.
right.
You did come from the beauty industry though. So thinking about that space, you were probably already trained to think about the formula, ingredients, building consumer trust, right? Did that background in beauty help the mindset shape that you approached Southside with from day one, or what were some of the similarities that you saw?
From day one, 100%. I was so shocked at the lack of transparency in the category. And the first thing you do when you launch any new beauty product is you go through the ingredient list, also known as the Inky list. And so you go line by line, you go ingredient by ingredient, you highlight what you want the consumer to know because everyone, especially with access to social media and the internet, everyone is able to self-educate. And sometimes that's great, but sometimes it can work against you. So you always want to lead the charge in terms of educating on your product. And there was very little of that I had witnessed in canned cocktails specifically. And so taking that playbook and just using it from concept, truly, from when this was just an idea, it was always integrated. I always knew that we were going to do a way to formulate without artificial colors, preservatives, or flavors. I always knew that, like, if somebody looked at this ingredient list, I didn't want them to be scared. I always wanted people to know how much sugar, how many calories, like what's actually inside of this, because it was just from day one, like, that's what you legally had to do for beauty. And so the fact that there were no laws obviously makes sense now requiring some of these things, but if you have the opportunity to go into this saturated category like ready to drink cocktail and alcohol, finding the niche for us was introducing not only a more premium gin based option, but also leading the charge in terms of the conversation of just what you're drinking.
I'm glad you mentioned the distinctions too, because as somebody myself, going from the nonprofit space to the corporate space, right? So many different laws and regulations. You can start a nonprofit, have to go through all of these things. You start an LLC or another corporation, you have to go through all of these different types of steps. So it's interesting when you talk about, hey, you have a beauty product, this is what you have to go through. And then you have a beverage, add on the layer of an alcoholic beverage,
Right.
all of the regulations and things that you need to go to and through, right? So I'm so glad that you had mentioned that distinction. And that's probably really important for potential entrepreneurs that they're hearing this now. I want to get into a little bit of building the brand. Looking at your logo, beautifully done. I love the colors. I love the framework, all how it's built. People often look at something that's very, very polished. They look at a brand, right, and they see it, and there's probably that assumption of an overnight success, right? We've talked to a lot of people who are either on Shark Tank or people who have, put the product out there, had gotten tons of money, right? That overnight success. We hear a lot about that. I want to hear more about the least glamorous decisions that really mattered most to you in those early days. Talk me through what
Yeah.
happened when you first started. What were some of those things that maybe you don't get asked a lot about when you were building this brand?
You are spot on in the way that being a founder and CEO looks really sexy on paper, but everything is so much more operational and gritty than I think people realize. Because when you do talk to founders who do go on Shark Tank and do have these fabulous exits or investments, like that is the really cool part. But for me and for Southsides, it has really just been the constant pursuit of perfection for our product, first and foremost, because without the product, I don't have a company. And then all of the layers that go into that. So, supply chain, certifications. Then, once you have that, it's getting to the consumer. And because you're in alcohol, you have to navigate the three-tier distribution system, which is all the distribution channels, all the negotiations state by state. So, in the US, it's like you have 50 different countries that you're working with. You have different pricing, different rules, different requirements. It can really become a lot. And so it's very heads down work, is how I would describe it. And with alcohol, I think it's important to emphasize that there really are no overnight success stories in the category. It can take years. And sometimes it feels like you have these new brands that come on the scene. But if you actually look at how long they've been in business just to get this ounce of attention, it's fascinating. So even just to get to this point where we have like an ounce of attention has been a 4 or 5 year build, but we've only been publicly facing since May of 2024.
Mhm. Did you have assumptions when you went into the alcohol space about what it would be like? Were there any things that were like you went in there and you were like, wow, this is completely different than what I thought it would be, maybe completely different than what you read online or the research that you had done? Was there something a little bit different?
So, making if you use contract manufacturers, which many people do in beauty and in beverage, the actual physical process of creating the product is not too dissimilar, but where the differences come in and where I was surprised at just how different it was in the regulatory side of things and the governing bodies that surround alcohol and just how restricted distribution can be, especially for a spirits-based product. And so because I'll give you an example, because we're 10% alcohol by volume, if a state like Florida, for instance, allows certain percentage ABVs to be sold in grocery, we're actually over that threshold. So because I didn't know that, we're not allowed or even have the opportunity to be in something like a Publix, which would be great for building our brand. So we have to be exclusively in the liquor stores. So I think, to answer your question, what really surprised me is just exactly how regulated and how complex it is every day. I feel like I learned something new. There's also tied house laws, which go back to prohibition, which tie into how I'm even able to talk about, promote, and market this product. So you have to be really, really careful, more careful than I think, we had to be in beauty. And so that has been a constant learning curve.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. We also don't talk enough about entrepreneurship is very, very risky. I mean, you are putting money, time, legal, all of these things into building your business. Were there any moments in this journey where the risk felt very, very real and you had to sort of remind yourself to keep going? Because I hear that a lot from people. They're like, you know what? I just decided that I was going to do it no matter what. I knew
Yeah.
that there'd be risks, but sometimes there are those moments when you're like, oh my God, this could actually really impact my
Yeah.
reputation, what I'm doing for the rest of my life.
Yeah, I think honestly, for me, the entire process has felt that way. I'm a very type A careful person. And there are more times than I can count where, an example, we've had investors back out and I'm bridging the months in between with my own savings or 401k or something of the sort, which is absolutely what you sign up to do as a founder. And I think also from the risk standpoint, on a more personal note, like you really don't know what you're getting into until you're in the thick of it, in terms of, even your personal relationships, friends, family, my husband, like that all fell on the back burner. And so you just kind of can feel at times this overwhelming sense of just like your spidey senses start tingling. You're like, okay, there's a lot of risk around me at all times. You take a calculated guess at just how much risk there will be, but when it kind of goes over your threshold, which it will, like to all future entrepreneurs out there, whatever you think is your lowest, it'll get lower than that. But coming out of it, you have the beauty and the strength and the resilience. But finding that balance, and the more that you can kind of stay in tune with it, it gets easier. But I think, like, to answer your question, the whole thing always feels risky
Mm,
because it is.
mm, absolutely. You mentioned, your husband, and I think a lot about people that have their support system, or sometimes it's extra levels of challenging, right? When you're starting off, and even when you have to be on your phone during the holidays, or like all of these different things. So for people listening, was it normal to not have that work-life balance when you were starting, and maybe even now? What was that like when you think about the holistic view of your journey as an entrepreneur?
I think as an entrepreneur, what you sign up for is you abandon the hope that work-life balance exists because your life becomes work, but in the most rewarding way. And so when it's your, I call it my baby. When this is my baby, I don't understand anybody. I don't expect anybody to understand just how much I care about it, but working on a Saturday or constantly being on doesn't bother me because it's something that I'm building because I love it so much. And so that's, I think, where the mindset shift is versus if you're just working for, a company that you're ambivalent about that pays the bills. And so there is that piece to it. But I think I sat down with my husband a few years ago and I was like, you know what? Let's call this the 5 to 7 year rodeo. Like, we know that to build a brand and to be successful, it takes some time. And so we're just kind of letting go and understanding that whatever happens over this next stretch of time happens, and we signed up for it. We knew what was going to potentially be ahead of us, and so we're smack in the middle of that rodeo and we're just holding on for dear life.
I like that you framed it that way. A lot of people do need to have those discussions, right? Like this is what it's going to look like when I'm first starting, right? It's
Right.
it's a grind, and it's a lot. So I'm so glad that you've dived into that. I want to switch gears a little bit. Before we talk about the work that you're doing with clean alcohol, for those that don't know, what even in the world is clean alcohol?
So I think that term in and of itself can even be confusing, because what I want to acknowledge first is that no amount of alcohol is healthy or good for you. Like, that's the place where I
Yeah.
like to
Mhm.
start. So truly, when you hear healthy drinking, just think, okay, that's an oxymoron. Where we wanted to come in was beauty and personal care have standards. Grocery and other consumer goods have guidelines. When you go to a store, you expect to see an ingredient list, a nutrition facts label. Like, you're not guessing at what's inside, especially if you have allergies or sensitivities or things of that sort. So for alcohol and the category, why doesn't it have this level of transparency or education or enforcement? I just personally believed that consumers deserved to know exactly what they were getting. And then on top of that, I think it is sometimes shocking that you want to believe that a company is going to put the best ingredients in the product that they're giving to you. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. We see that with some of these cereal companies that were targeted to kids that had those artificial food colors, right? So unfortunately, it's the same, if not a little bit more rampant in alcohol. So my approach was, quote unquote, yeah, healthy drinking is an oxymoron, but it doesn't mean we need to double down and put artificial colors, artificial flavors, artificial sweeteners, glycerin, you name it, in the product. So that's really what we're trying to do. And we looked at, think USDA organic meets Allure Best of Beauty meets like clean at Sephora. Like we just wanted to have some guidelines for people so that way we could have some sort of standard to provide people that is quote unquote cleaner.
Yeah, because I was thinking about this question because I had wanted to ask about, this idea of clean alcohol is gaining traction.
Right.
What's interesting to me and what I like that you talk about is it's the honesty behind it. You're saying that yes, alcohol is alcohol. You know, there the when you're drinking it, you still have to consider what you're drinking, right?
Right.
But you're building a premium brand. And just like you would care about what you put on your face, what products you put on your face, what makeup you put on, you want to care the type of alcohol that you drink. So
Right.
I think that it's really, really fascinating how you're framing this. And I want you to maybe share something to potential consumers, right? Maybe what do you think most consumers don't realize about what they're actually drinking and buying, what's in their
Yeah.
drinks?
I think it goes back to kind of how I mentioned just how dirty some of these products can be. From a like corporate standpoint, beverage profit margins are low. Beauty margins were so sexy compared to what we're working with in this industry. And so where on a P&L are you going to try to make the most cuts ingredient quality? And I think that there's a huge misconception that what I'm doing must be extremely cost prohibitive. It's not true. We actually have incredible like industry leading margins. So it's just uncomfortable for incumbents who have already formulated because reformulating is expensive. Refinding your contract manufacturers and your, key accounts and rejiggering all of your formulas, that takes time. So I think people would be surprised to learn that it's actually not as tough of a switch as you would think. And there is a reason that these products don't have the nutrition facts panels or ingredient lists if they don't have to. It can be shocking to learn how much hidden sugar is in your favorite wine, or how many artificial ingredients are in your favorite canned cocktail, or the fact that there's glycerin and caramel coloring in your tequila, just lurking unknown. And so back in my beauty days, the other thing that I think is important to mention, we knew that if you combined vitamin C, which can also be called ascorbic acid, with certain artificial preservatives like potassium sorbate or sodium benzoate, it had the propensity to potentially, say that 5 times fast, propensity to potentially create benzene, which is an extra carcinogen. And so when we were formulating this, we ran into that because we have a large concentration of lemon juice, vitamin C, and some of the contract manufacturers were like, we're going to add these preservatives. And I said, absolutely not. So I just think that people need to understand it, that it's asking what is in your beverage should not be a luxury, and expecting more from these companies is more than normal. But I also acknowledge that, again, you kind of come up a nuanced point where it's like, some people are just like, this is alcohol. Like, I really don't care. Like, it doesn't speak to me. And that's also fine because we're just talking to the people who inherently trend towards this way of life and kind of product accountability, anyways, in hopes that that sentiment will spread over time.
Mm, absolutely. Absolutely. I love the honesty and the transparency and how you talk about this. I think it goes back into your brand too. Like we mentioned earlier, I love the visuals of the brand, and Southside has a very clear identity. You do visually, but also how you talk about it. Let's go back to the process of building this brand. How intentional were you maybe that you weren't going to appeal to everyone? Or tell me a bit about just the brand itself when you say the original gin cocktail. Walk me through this process of how you started this brand.
Sure. First and foremost, you want things to be ownable. And so when we were going through the trademark process, the original Southside was something that we could own. So, a Southside cocktail has existed since the 1920s, or maybe even earlier than that. No one can really agree on the true origin story. So, from just a IP standpoint, that was important to us. We loved the name, and it really was the quote unquote original Southside recipes that use gin. So, it made sense. From day one, I took the what I tell people is the liquid death approach of I don't want anybody to be ambivalent about this brand. I want people to form opinions and feelings, good or bad, because that's going to help us get the consumer off center enough to add us to their consideration set. And I think a lot of people don't realize just how little time you have when you're sitting on shelf to grab people's attention. It's like less than half a second. And so every single thing that you see from the colors, yellow and green, lemon and mint, to our fun character Squeeze the lemon, to our tagline, which is, that's fresh as FCK, that polarizes a lot of people, but it also, people love it. And so it's a great way to have people help build that brand loyalty, brand affinity, feel attached to something, have a little bit more of an identity, because you and I both know this. When you market to everybody, you market to no one.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that you mentioned something that you can own. We often don't talk about that enough. You can have a name of something that you really, really want, but it just might not be available for you to have it.
Right. Yeah. And if you're looking for strategic partners or fundraising or doing things that, you want as much as you want to be able to own as much as possible and protect your brand as much as possible, there's nothing stopping anyone from coming in tomorrow and introducing another canned Southside. But what I do know for certain is that they can't use my tagline. They can't use the original Southside, and I've protected us quite a bit. So,
Absolutely. And I say this to entrepreneurs and founders and things all the time. It's also the core of the mission that you've built, even when it's a product. And look what you've done and how you've branded this and talked about clean alcohol, the transparency, how you're reacting to what your consumers think of the brand. All of that is so important. And I love that you've dived into that because that's really collective and important for the work that you're doing. Another question about your brand and partnerships. You've built some really interesting partnerships too for your brand and everything. What decisions do you have to make to filter out some of these for your brand? How do you make partnership decisions? How do you know that you're going to align with other brands and things out there? Walk me through that process.
absolutely. So, in our first year, we pretty much said yes to everything just to get an idea of what works and what doesn't. So, now looking back, we evaluated exclusively on how it helps us get cans in hands and the notorious industry term, quote unquote, liquid to lips as much as possible. So for us, the sports partnerships have been really great for this because we can introduce the brand in a super approachable way, all while making it easier, super sessionable, having that opportunity to both sell the product to the sports venues, but also have tastings where there's a massive number of people who are already in a consumption mindset. And I think that that term consumption mindset is really important because where we can run into issues is, let's say, a tasting at a Whole Foods on a Tuesday at noon. People are going to look at you like you have horns and a third eye if you're asking them to drink alcohol at that time in store. So being really strategic and evaluating where your spend is better spent, and even in certain regions and demographics. So that's really how we look at everything.
Mm. Absolutely. Partnerships are also really interesting because when you launched the Clean Alcohol Collective, you brought together, suppliers together,
Right.
right? To think through this. One thing I'm curious about is how did you balance the want to collaborate and push this alcohol collective forward, but also, competition? Like
Mhm.
how, when you're trying to elevate something, but you're also or considering working with competitors to make it possible.
I think this is why alcohol is such a cool category to me because, and this is just how I personally feel, unless you are another gin-based canned cocktail, I don't really see us as competing. I know some people will roll their eyes at that because they could say, oh, well, you're actually competing against High Noon and Surfside and things that aren't even gin based. But what I am coming to find is for alcohol specifically, a rising tide does tend to lift all the ships here. And so having a full bar of offering those better for you, more transparent, clean alcohol collective approved brands that we can market for events, partnerships, retail settings is the name of the game. And I think it's actually so cool that we can work together to make some sort of meaningful change, even if it's slow, and use that as an opportunity to educate consumers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great way to think about it. And that's how you know you're so confident in your brand when you dive into it that way. I love
Right.
that. Love that. I love asking successful business owners, entrepreneurs, some of these questions because it's what I think people really, really want to know as they're diving into this. You can be so successful, but sometimes you might not even hear some of these questions or get the answers that you want. I want to dive into like leadership skills and your own visibility and pressure. Were there any leadership skills that you feel like you really developed as Southside grew? Like I know you talked about earlier about being maybe like a type A and wanting control over things or all of the things. Like what sort of skills did you build that maybe you didn't think that you would have built?
The top two for me, hands down, are resilience and patience. And patience is not a virtue that I was born with. You can ask my husband or my family. But I have definitely developed that as time has gone on. And then, an example I'll give you is being an entrepreneur and being a founder. You get so many no's so quickly. And as time goes on and as you prove success, those no's can turn into maybes and sometimes even a yes. So in our early days, we reached out to a distributor in my home state of Oklahoma, where, that's the origin story. That's where this whole thing got started. They turned us down, and I was so devastated because they were great. And we ended up going with someone else. And a year later, so not even a long time, a year later, they saw us at a trade show and came up and said how much they regretted turning us down. They made us a super strong offer to join their portfolio, and now we're great partners. So for me, I was, like I said, type A. I wanted to get stuff done, and I wanted to get it done as fast as possible and in the best way possible. But sometimes that's just not an option, and you have to continually revisit things. And that has made me, I think, a much stronger leader.
Oh, I love that. The stories of regret, I hear that all the time. Like people are like, oh, I'm so mad that I didn't partner
Right.
with this or like with this org or this company. And then they reach out and then you make that decision of, you know what, I'm still going to work with this person because I know it would be a good fit, put ego aside and all of that. But sometimes it's like, I told you so. I told you that you would wanted to partner with me, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The other thing, and I'm sure you've experienced so much, when you grow and you become a really visible brand, and even with your family, right? Growth means visibility. Visibility means so many opinions and people that are going to want to talk your ear off, give you advice unsolicited. How do you decide which feedback to listen to and which to tune out?
It's always hard. And it's like the age old, opinions are like belly buttons. Everybody's got one. I don't want to see it. So on the one hand, you learn to filter out a lot. And it's
Yeah.
always really surprising to me where the best like nuggets of wisdom come from. So I think just like weighing where the advice is coming from with where you want your brand to go can be helpful,
Mhm.
because sometimes people are giving you these opinions from a lens that you're not thinking about, which can be good.
Mhm.
So I wish I had a, 100% surefire way to tell you how to filter out those opinions, but it's a case by case basis for sure.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah, and it's one of those things where you may have taken the advice 6 months ago, but now it's changed and shifted. It happens so quickly. You just
Right.
don't know what advice that you need to take and when to take it.
Right.
Completely agree with that. If you could go back to the beginning of when you started this, what's one thing you wish you would have told yourself maybe to stop worrying about, or just something that you were like, you know what? Like, I wish I didn't have these negative thoughts or this whole thought process.
Going back to your opinion question, honestly, I wish I could just sit myself down and say from the get-go,
Mm,
don't listen to other people's opinions, especially as it
yeah.
relates to criticism on, how you're doing the core build. And by that, I mean, you open yourself up to a lot of criticism between fundraising and publicly building a company. And that can be really hard to do. And I think that sometimes there are certain people where if the brand is not for them, instead of communicating that in a way that is civil and corporate, it is communicated in a seemingly hostile way, and you just have to not take it personally. Like, you have to truly be like a duck, let it wash off of you,
Yes.
and then keep on keeping on, paddle like hell
Mhm.
underneath. So
Yeah.
that's that.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I can't wait to hear your answer to this next question. This is my favorite question. We end every episode with this, and you don't have to know how to play chess to answer it. I always like to preface with that. What does it mean to you to unleash your inner queen? And how do you tap into that power as a founder, a leader, and somebody building something entirely on your own terms?
I loved this question, and I was very excited to formulate my answer. And so, as we know, the queen, powerful, the most powerful, versatile piece on the chessboard.
Mhm.
And so, for me, unleashing my inner queen was really fully giving into my intuition as a female founder and leader. There was a really interesting study done by the NIH that was titled Female Intuition in Economics and Conscious Leadership. And in conclusion, they found that empirically, female intuition can emerge as a pivotal resource for decision making when things are uncertain. And when you are a first time founder in an industry with less experience than others, there is a lot of uncertainty. And it also goes to show that it can be a good resource, your intuition, this female intuition, for leadership, innovation, and even potential stakeholder engagement. And I think oftentimes as women, I'm speaking for myself here, I second guess myself constantly. And I tend to be very careful in my approach because I do feel that I can be critiqued more harshly than my male counterparts, especially in this industry. And it just goes to show you that if you quote unquote unleash, or for me, really allow myself to completely be guided by what you know to be right and true, it can lead to great successes. And then you, in turn, become the most powerful, versatile version of yourself. So that's my answer for you.
Oh, I love it. I love it so much. It's so true. And it's just so inspiring what you've built. I know so many people, and I think especially young women, when they hear your story, are going to be really excited about this because just because you started in one industry doesn't mean you can't pivot to something else. You took
Right.
all that you learned in beauty and you pivoted and you put it in this incredible, incredible business. So, we're so appreciative of you coming on. We'll, of course, include all of the links and all the great things to learn more about you, to buy the drink, to buy merch in the description. But is there anything that you want people to know or anything coming down the line that you're like, this would be really great, or anything that people can do now to support you?
Yes, actually. So we got some really exciting news from our partners at Whole Foods. We will be expanding into an additional 105 locations
Woo!
for the spring. So that means we will be coming closer and closer to you in a retail setting. So I always tell people to go to our website, check the map, see the location. We'll have those come out soon. Otherwise, you can give us a peek on our Instagram, which is just Drink Southsides, and any form of support that you are willing to do is absolutely wonderful with us. And so thank you again for the opportunity to tell my story.
Of course, of course. The map on the website is so helpful. I so encourage people to see if you can get one. And if not, tell your friends about it. Tell everyone about this and encourage them. I love it. I love it so much. Through the original Southside and the Clean Alcohol Collective, you're really building and reshaping how we think about alcohol, transparency, and what it means to build a company with intention. So we so appreciate you coming on and sharing your story. And for everyone listening, as always, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a review because every time you do, you help another woman step into her power and her unleash her inner queen. Thank you.